Okay, folks, as we pick up with our conversation about the study of utility, I thought it might be helpful to go back over kind of the ground rules of utility and then try and work a quick problem together here from start to finish. A little bit comprehensive, but allows us to put a lot of the pieces of the puzzle together. We'll recall that when we think of utility, we think of this idea of satisfaction. And indeed, utility, or the satisfaction we speak of, is going to come from the consumption of various goods or services. Now, we assume that our fundamental assumptions hold true here, that those participants in the market are motivated by maximizing their personal or economic outcomes. And in this case, we're thinking they're going to want to maximize the satisfaction they get from consumption of goods or services. But we also have to remember they're constrained by one of our other assumptions, and that is scarcity of resources. And this will play out in our situation here in terms of a budget constraint. Only so much money can be allocated to the consumption of these goods or services in pursuit of utility. And then that leads, therefore, to the problem that we want to address. The objective in our analysis, therefore, becomes the idea that all of our consumers are trying to accomplish this idea of maximizing their individual utility subject to a budget constraint. And in this case, we're going to talk about maximizing total utility subject to the dollars able to be invested in the consumption of the goods or services. So I thought we might try and work a problem here to see if we can put the pieces together. And let's assume that our friend Danny is getting up late but hungry and has got to stop and get some breakfast along the way. So he's going to stop at the Montclair Bakery, and he's got to make a decision about what to have for breakfast, and his choice: muffins and or coffee. And in specific, he can buy a muffin for $4 each, or he can buy a cup of coffee for $2 each. And when he looks in his wallet, he finds out he's got $30 to spend. Now, we're presented with a table below in the problem that shows that whenever Danny has a particular product, it brings him some measure of utility or satisfaction. And we see a table presented showing the number of muffins that he could consume, the number of cups of coffee he could consume, and the total utility attached to the consumption of those products. Now, to go forward with a problem like this, we need to make sure we have sufficient information to get to our outcome. Now, recall what we're trying to do is to maximize total utility from the consumption of a bundle of goods subject to a budget constraint. Now, to pull this off, we need to make sure we have the information we need to address. First of all, we're going to assume that we're going to be working with a bundle of two products. In our case, we've got those identified. They're going to be muffins and coffee. Now, clearly in the real world, we'd have a broader bundle of products, but we're going to use this dyadic situation, to illustrate the trade-off that a consumer has to make between products subject to their budget constraint in pursuit of maximizing total utility. And since we're going to be trying to put this in dollar terms given the budget, we need to have prices for each product. And indeed, we have that for our problem at hand. We've got a price of $4 for muffins or $2 for a cup of coffee. We also need to know what the constraint is in our analysis, because we're going to try and maximize one outcome, that is total utility, subject to a given constraint. And the constraint we have to deal with is our assumption of scarcity of resources. Our scarce resource is going to be dollars, and Danny's limited to $30 for breakfast. We also recognize that we're going to try and maximize utility. Well, we've got to have one of two things: either total utility measures or marginal utility measures. What we really need in particular is the marginal utility measure. If it's given to us, we're in good shape. If it's not given to us, we're going to at least need total utility measures from which to derive marginal utility. And we'll see that's what we're going to do in our problem. We were presented with total utility measures in table 1 from our problem, and we're going to have to derive some marginal utility from that. And then once we have that, although this is not given in the problem, ultimately we're going to have to calculate this measure, where we're going to convert the dollars that we have available in our budget into purchase units, if you will, of utility. And so we're going to have to come up with a calculation known as marginal utility per budget unit. In our case, it's going to be dollars, but it could be pounds of material in some other type of product. It could be hours of time if that was our constraint when we're trying to maximize an outcome. But in our case, we're going to have to calculate marginal utility per dollar in order to continue with the problem. So let's get to it. We're back to our original table from the problem statement, and I've just added 2 columns to it: marginal utility from muffins and marginal utility from coffee. And again, what we're interested in here is how much utility Danny's going to get from each additional purchase, or consumption in this case, of a given good. And the utility attached to additional consumption is going to be marginal in nature. It's attached to the next unit. Since we were not given the number, we have to calculate it. Well, when you think about it, we're always going to depart from a standpoint where a consumer has not yet consumed any of the product, and therefore they have no utility. But once they consume that first muffin, in Danny's case, he's going to say at the end of it, well, it was pretty satisfying, and I would rank it as kind of a 60 util level of satisfaction. Well, if that's the case, all 60 utils of that satisfaction came from the first muffin that he consumed. In the same token here, the total utility that Danny would have gotten from a cup of coffee would have been 0 if he had none, but the first one delivers 80 utils. And that means there's an additional 80 of satisfaction that comes from that first cup of coffee. We also can make the assessment here that Danny, relatively speaking, perceives coffee, at least the first cup, as being more satisfying than the first muffin. And so we can look at utils not only within the product category, but across products as well. Now, if Danny were to have a second muffin, and we asked him after that second muffin, how satisfied are you now? And he said, well, in total, I'm satisfied to the extent of 108 utils. But that represents not only what he got from the second muffin, but the 60 that he got from the first. And so the second muffin must have delivered the difference between 108 and 60, which would be 48. Same analysis holds true here. The second cup of coffee results in Danny experiencing 104 utils of total satisfaction after the second. Well, after the first, he demonstrated 80 utils of satisfaction. The second cup, therefore, the additional cup, the marginal cup, must have delivered 80 plus 24 to get the second, and so to get the total of 104. So the second cup brought marginal utility of 24 utils. Third muffin, I'm now at 148 in total satisfaction. I was at 108. That third cup must have brought 40. And we can continue to derive these marginal utilities by the same approach. Now, we'll notice that these utilities that we're getting from each marginal cup begin to demonstrate our law of diminishing marginal utility, that each cup up to a point brings additional satisfaction, but it brings less and less satisfaction. And indeed, the sixth cup right here brings no additional satisfaction. Danny had a total utility of 158 after the fifth cup, total utility of 158 after the sixth. He got no benefit from that sixth cup, hence zero marginal utility. And here we see it turn to dissatisfaction. It actually decreases the level of total utility because the marginal utility associated with the seventh cup is indeed negative. We'll fill in the table the same way here. The third cup brings Danny the difference between total utility after 3 and total utility after 2, or 22 utils. We've got 20 units of marginal utility from the fourth cup. We've got only one, still positive, but only one after the fifth cup. And here we see that Danny's had just a little bit too much coffee and is actually dissatisfied from it. And so we can see how, even not given our marginal utility, we're simply going to calculate it or derive it from the change in total utility from cup to cup or from muffin to muffin.